The morning sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook Estates, a pristine suburban development where manicured lawns stretched like emerald carpets and every mailbox stood at regulation height. This wasn't just any neighborhood, this was an HOA paradise, where rules weren't suggestions but sacred commandments carved in stone and enforced with the zealousness of medieval inquisitors. At exactly 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday that would later be remembered as the beginning of the end, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwick stepped onto her front porch to retrieve her newspaper. As the HOA board president for the past 6 years, Eleanor ruled Willowbrook with an iron fist wrapped in a floral print velvet glove. Her hawk-like eyes scanned the neighborhood with the precision of a military surveillance satellite, cataloging every potential violation, every blade of grass that dared grow a millimeter too tall. But this morning, something was different. A faint whirring sound drifted through the crisp autumn air, barely audible, like a mechanical hummingbird hovering just beyond perception. Eleanor's head snapped up, her steel-gray hair catching the morning light as she searched the sky. There, perhaps 50 feet above the tree line, a small black object hovered with suspicious intent. A drone. The very word sent shivers down Eleanor's spine. Drones were explicitly prohibited in Willowbrook Estates under Section 7.3b of the Community Guidelines. No aerial recording devices, remote-controlled aircraft, or surveillance equipment shall be operated within the confines of the development without express written permission from the HOA board. Eleanor had personally authored that clause after watching one too many true crime documentaries about privacy invasion. The mechanical intruder circled slowly, its camera lens glinting like a malevolent eye. Eleanor clutched her bathrobe tighter and retreated into her house, but not before noticing the drone's deliberate, almost taunting movements. This wasn't some teenager's Christmas toy gone astray. This was calculated, purposeful surveillance. By 8:15 a.m., Eleanor's phone was buzzing with messages from other board members. Margaret Pemberton from Maple Lane had spotted the drone hovering near the community pool area. Harold Finch reported seeing it circling the clubhouse parking lot. Most disturbing of all, Gladys Morrison claimed the device had lingered outside her bathroom window for what felt like an eternity, though security footage would later reveal it was merely 17 seconds. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting at Eleanor's kitchen table, their faces grim with the weight of this unprecedented crisis. Margaret, the board's vice president and Eleanor's closest ally in the war against neighborhood chaos, spread out a map of Willowbrook like a general planning a military campaign. "It's conducting systematic surveillance," Margaret declared, her voice trembling with indignation. "This morning alone, we've documented 12 separate sightings across 7 different streets." Harold, the board's treasurer and a retired insurance adjuster with an eye for detail, adjusted his reading glasses. "The flight patterns suggest someone with intimate knowledge of our community layout. This isn't random, it's targeted reconnaissance." Gladys, the board's secretary and self-appointed moral guardian of the development, clutched her pearls dramatically. "What if it's recording our private moments? What if there's some perverted voyeur controlling that mechanical menace?" Eleanor raised her hand for silence, a gesture that commanded immediate attention. In her 6 years as board president, she had weathered storms that would have broken lesser leaders. The Great Mailbox Rebellion of 2019, when the Johnsons painted theirs forest green instead of regulation hunter green. The Flamingo Crisis of 2021, when Mrs. Chin dared display a pink plastic flamingo that violated the tasteful lawn ornament clause. The Parking Permit Uprising of 2022, when residents questioned why guests needed written authorization for visits longer than 2 hours. But this was different. This was war. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor announced with the gravitas of a Supreme Court justice, "we are facing an existential threat to the very fabric of our community. Someone is using advanced surveillance technology to spy on our residents, document our private lives, and potentially gather intelligence for purposes unknown." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Eleanor's antique grandfather clock. A clock that, incidentally, had sparked its own HOA controversy when the Weatherbys complained its hourly chimes exceeded the noise ordinance decibel limits. Harold cleared his throat nervously. "Have we considered that it might just be someone taking aerial photos? Maybe for real estate purposes or..." Real estate purposes? Eleanor's voice rose to a pitch that made the crystal stemware in her china cabinet sing in sympathy. Harold, this drone has been conducting sustained surveillance operations across our entire development. No legitimate real estate photographer needs to hover outside bathroom windows or circle the same property 17 times. Margaret nodded vigorously, her costume jewelry jangling like wind chimes in a hurricane. Eleanor's right. This smells like reconnaissance. Someone is gathering intelligence on our community, and we need to find out who and why. The board members exchanged worried glances. In their collective decades of HOA service, they had dealt with rebellious residents, petty disputes, and the occasional act of defiance. But never had they faced an adversary who operated from the shadows, or rather, from the skies. Gladys leaned forward conspiratorially. What if it's one of our own residents? Someone with a grudge against the board? The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from a forbidden barbecue grill. The board members knew better than most that their enforcement of community standards hadn't won them universal popularity. There were the Hendersons, still bitter about the deck renovation dispute. The Martinez family, who never quite forgave the board for the children's play set controversy. The enigmatic Mr. Thompson from Elm Street, who had challenged multiple board decisions and harbored what Eleanor considered concerning anti-authority tendencies. Eleanor's mind raced through the possibilities. Whoever was operating this drone possessed technical sophistication, intimate knowledge of the community, and most concerning of all, a complete disregard for established authority. This wasn't just rule-breaking, this was revolution. We need to identify this aerial anarchist, Eleanor declared, her voice carrying the weight of divine mandate. And when we do, we'll make an example that will resonate through every HOA community in the state. Outside, as if summoned by their very discussion, the faint whirring sound returned. The board members rushed to Eleanor's bay window, their faces pressed against the glass like children at a toy store. There, hovering with mechanical precision above the community's central fountain, was their tormentor. The drone seemed to pause, its camera lens pointing directly at Eleanor's kitchen window. For a moment, predator and prey locked eyes across the suburban battlefield. Then, with movements that seemed almost mocking in their casualness, the drone executed a slow, deliberate rotation, what could only be described as an aerial bow, before ascending into the cloudless sky and disappearing beyond the tree line. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Somewhere in Willowbrook Estates lived a resident with the audacity to challenge the established order, the technical skills to wage war from above, and the brazen confidence to taunt the very authority that kept their community functioning. The hunt for the mystery drone pilot had begun, and Eleanor Hartwick would not rest until justice was served and order restored to her perfectly manicured kingdom. But as the morning sun climbed higher and the drone's whirring faded into memory, none of the board members could have imagined that their aerial nemesis was just getting started, and that the real show was about to begin. The first video appeared at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night, uploaded to the Willowbrook Estates Facebook group with the simple caption, "Interesting evening at the Hartwick residence." Within minutes, the post had 17 likes, 43 comments, and was spreading through the digital neighborhood like wildfire through drought-stricken grassland. The footage was crystal clear, shot from an elevated angle that captured Eleanor Hartwick's backyard in stunning high definition. There she was, the iron-fisted HOA president herself, hosting what appeared to be an intimate dinner party on her expansive deck. The same deck that, according to community records, had been constructed without proper HOA approval and exceeded the maximum allowable square footage by 37%. But the deck violation paled in comparison to what happened next in the video. Eleanor, wineglass in hand, gestured dramatically toward her prized garden where a magnificent pergola stretched across the entire back portion of her lot. The structure was undeniably beautiful, crafted from rich cedar and draped with climbing roses that would have made better homes and gardens weep with envy. It was also undeniably illegal. The HOA Architectural Guidelines, Section 4.7a, explicitly stated that pergolas could not exceed 12 feet in length and required board approval for construction. Eleanor's pergola stretched nearly 25 feet and had never once appeared on any board meeting agenda for approval. The woman who had denied pergola applications from 3 different residents over the past 2 years had built herself a structure that violated every rule she claimed to uphold. By Thursday morning, the video had been viewed 847 times and shared across neighborhood group chats, email chains, and whispered conversations at the community mailbox cluster. The comments section had become a digital battlefield where years of suppressed HOA frustrations erupted like a volcano of suburban rage. "She denied my deck extension because it was 6 inches too long," typed Sarah Martinez, her fury translating perfectly through the screen. Meanwhile, "She's got a personal resort in her backyard. We got written up for hanging wind chimes, but Queen Eleanor gets to build Versailles behind her house," added Mike Henderson, his comment accompanied by 3 angry face emojis. Eleanor discovered the video at 6:23 a.m. while conducting her morning social media surveillance, a routine she'd established to monitor community sentiment and potential rule violations. The coffee mug in her hand shattered against the kitchen floor as she watched herself, wine-drunk and gesticulating wildly, unknowingly confessing to multiple architectural violations while an unseen aerial witness documented every hypocritical moment. The emergency board meeting convened at 7:30 a.m. in Eleanor's living room, the same room where family portraits smiled down at a gathering that felt more like a war council. Margaret arrived clutching her phone like a weapon, Harold shuffled in with printouts of the video's metadata, and Gladys appeared at the door with red-rimmed eyes that suggested she'd been crying since dawn. "It's a disaster," Margaret announced, her usual composure cracked like cheap veneer. "The entire community is in revolt. My phone hasn't stopped buzzing since midnight. Everyone's demanding explanations, investigations, and some are calling for your resignation." Eleanor paced her living room like a caged predator, her silk robe flowing behind her with each agitated turn. The anonymous drone pilot had done more than capture footage. They had weaponized hypocrisy, turned Eleanor's own rules into ammunition, and fired the first shot in what was becoming a full-scale neighborhood war. "We need damage control," she declared, her voice carrying none of its usual authority. "The pergola can be modified. We'll claim it was a temporary structure, or a misunderstanding about the measurement guidelines." Harold, ever the meticulous treasurer, consulted his printouts with the dedication of a monk studying scripture. The construction permits show the pergola was installed 3 years ago. The deck expansion was completed 18 months ago. "These aren't recent oversights, Eleanor. These are sustained violations." The weight of those words settled over the room like fog rolling in from the coast. Eleanor had spent years crafting her reputation as the guardian of community standards, the unwavering enforcer who treated all residents equally under the iron law of HOA regulations. Now that carefully constructed image was crumbling faster than poorly mixed concrete. Gladys, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "What if there are more videos? What if this pilot has been watching all of us?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud pregnant with lightning. If the mystery pilot had footage of Eleanor's violations, what else might they have recorded? Board meetings where decisions were made in secret? Private conversations about residents? Personal moments that were never meant for public consumption? As if summoned by their collective paranoia, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a notification. A new post had appeared in the Willowbrook Estates Facebook group. This time, the video was titled, "The Midnight Oil, a board member's secret project." The footage showed Harold Finch's property at 2:17 a.m., timestamp clearly visible in the corner. There was Harold himself, dressed in paint-splattered clothes, working by flashlight to install what appeared to be a decorative fence extension. The same Harold who had denied fence modification requests from 5 different residents over the past year, citing concerns about neighborhood aesthetic consistency. But this wasn't just any fence modification. Harold's midnight project extended his property line by nearly 2 feet into the common area green space, a violation so egregious it could result in legal action from the county planning department. The comments on this second video were even more vicious than the first. Residents who had suffered under Harold's strict interpretation of fence regulations poured out their fury in caps lock declarations of betrayal and demands for justice. I had T.O. tear down my entire garden border because Harold said it was 3 inches too high, typed Mrs. Chin, her digital voice shaking with rage. Meanwhile, he's stealing common area land in the middle of the night like some kind of property vampire. By noon, a third video had appeared. This one featured Margaret Pemberton's property, showing her elaborate outdoor kitchen setup that violated at least 6 different HOA regulations regarding outdoor cooking facilities, storage structures, and commercial-grade equipment in residential areas. The same Margaret who had forced the Weatherbees to remove their simple fire pit because it created an unsightly outdoor living area. The pattern was becoming clear. The mystery drone pilot wasn't conducting random surveillance. They were building a case, systematically documenting the hypocrisy that had infected the HOA board like a virus. Each video was a surgical strike, targeting the exact violations that each board member had most zealously enforced on others. Eleanor sat in her kitchen, surrounded by printed screenshots of Facebook comments, feeling like a general watching her army desert en masse. The neighborhood she had spent years controlling was slipping through her fingers like water through a broken dam. We're not just dealing with a rogue drone pilot, she realized aloud, her voice hollow with dawning comprehension. We're dealing with someone who knows us intimately. Someone who knows our patterns, our properties, our personal violations. This isn't random, this is revenge. The board members exchanged glances heavy with suspicion and fear. Who among their neighbors possessed such detailed knowledge of their personal violations? Who had been watching them with such calculating patience? Who had the technical skills to orchestrate this aerial assault on their authority? Outside, the faint whirring sound returned, as if the mechanical tormentor knew it was being discussed. Eleanor rushed to her window, but the sky was empty except for clouds and the judgmental gaze of circling birds. The mystery pilot had struck 3 devastating blows in less than 12 hours, and Eleanor knew with crystalline certainty that this was only the beginning. Somewhere in Willowbrook Estates, a resident with a drone, a grudge, and an encyclopedic knowledge of HOA hypocrisy was preparing their next move. The hunt for their identity had become more than a matter of community order. It had become a fight for the board's very survival. But as Eleanor would soon discover, hunting a ghost who strikes from the sky is far more dangerous than she ever imagined. The revolution had begun, and the rebels were filming. Friday morning arrived like a funeral procession, gray and somber, matching the mood that had settled over the HOA board like a burial shroud. Eleanor Hartwick stood at her kitchen window, clutching her 3rd cup of coffee and staring at the community she had once ruled with unquestioned authority. Now, that same community buzzed with rebellion, and she could practically feel the collective gaze of 247 households boring into her soul like laser beams of judgment. The overnight developments had been catastrophic. A 4th video had surfaced at 3:22 a.m., this one targeting Gladys Morrison's property. The footage revealed Gladys's elaborate garden shed, a structure that violated height restrictions, setback requirements, and the prohibition against unpermitted storage buildings. The same Gladys who had forced the Patel family to demolish their children's playhouse for being architecturally inconsistent with neighborhood standards. But this video was different. More personal. More invasive. The drone had captured Gladys through her kitchen window, counting what appeared to be stacks of cash while consulting a ledger book. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, and the meticulous organization of the money suggested this wasn't casual household budgeting. The comment section had exploded with speculation about potential HOA fund misappropriation, kickbacks from contractors, or worse. By dawn, someone had filed a formal complaint with the county auditor's office, demanding a full investigation of Willowbrook Estates' financial records. Eleanor's phone rang, jarring her from her morning contemplation of community collapse. The caller ID showed Detective Rodriguez, County Sheriff, and Eleanor's stomach dropped like a stone through water. Mrs. Hartwick, this is Detective Maria Rodriguez with the County Sheriff's Office. We've received multiple complaints regarding alleged financial irregularities and potential surveillance crimes in your HOA community. I need to schedule interviews with your entire board of directors. The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. Law enforcement involvement meant this situation had escalated beyond neighborhood drama into criminal investigation territory. The mysterious drone pilot hadn't just exposed HOA violations, they had potentially uncovered evidence of actual crimes. Detective Rodriguez, Eleanor managed, her voice steadier than she felt. I assure you that any financial irregularities are simply misunderstandings. As for surveillance crimes, we're the victims here. Someone is using illegal drone technology to spy on our private properties. Ma'am, I understand your position, but the evidence we've reviewed suggests a more complex situation. The drone footage appears to document ongoing violations of county building codes and potentially fraudulent activities. However, you're correct that unauthorized surveillance is also a serious crime. We'll be investigating both angles. After the call ended, Eleanor convened yet another emergency board meeting, but this time the atmosphere was different. The camaraderie born of shared authority had been replaced by the paranoia of mutual assured destruction. Each board member now eyed the others with suspicion, wondering who might be the next target of the aerial Avengers' righteous fury. Margaret arrived looking haggard, her usual perfectionist appearance abandoned in favor of survival mode. Harold shuffled in, clutching a briefcase full of financial documents, preparing for the inevitable audit. Gladys appeared last, her face puffy from tears and her hands shaking like autumn leaves in a windstorm. We need to identify this pilot before they destroy us completely, Eleanor announced, her voice carrying the desperation of a drowning woman grasping for driftwood. This isn't random harassment. This is calculated warfare. Someone with intimate knowledge of our personal violations is systematically dismantling our authority. Harold adjusted his glasses nervously. I've been thinking about the technical aspects. Operating a drone with this level of precision requires significant skill and expensive equipment. We're not dealing with a casual hobbyist. This is someone with serious investment in surveillance technology. Margaret nodded grimly. The flight patterns suggest someone who knows our schedules intimately. They filmed Eleanor's dinner party, caught Harold's midnight fence work, captured my outdoor kitchen during the exact window when I was using it. This level of timing isn't luck, it's intelligence. The board members spread out maps of Willowbrook Estates, marking locations where drone sightings had been reported. Red pins dotted the community like chickenpox, creating a pattern that revealed the pilot's methodical approach. They had systematically documented every corner of the development, suggesting either extensive reconnaissance or intimate familiarity with the neighborhood layout. Gladys, who had remained silent during the strategic planning, suddenly spoke up. What if it's someone who used to work for the HOA? A former contractor, property manager, or board member who has access to all our personal information? The suggestion sent chills through the room. Over the years, Willowbrook's HOA had employed dozens of contractors, service providers, and temporary staff members. Any one of them could have gathered intelligence about board members' personal properties, learned their schedules, and harbored grudges about business dealings gone wrong. Eleanor's mind raced through the possibilities. There was Dave Mitchell, the landscape contractor they'd fired after discovering he was using substandard mulch. Jennifer Walsh, the former property manager who'd been terminated for questioning board decisions too aggressively. Robert Chen, the architect who'd been blacklisted after challenging Eleanor's interpretation of design guidelines. But as they compiled their list of potential suspects, a more disturbing realization emerged. The drone pilot's knowledge went beyond professional interactions. They knew personal details about each board member's private violations, information that wouldn't be available to contractors or service providers. This is someone who lives here, Margaret whispered, the words hanging in the air like smoke from a forbidden cigarette. Someone who walks among us, attends our community meetings, smiles and waves while planning our destruction. The paranoia was becoming infectious. Eleanor found herself studying every neighbor interaction through a lens of suspicion. Was it Mr. Thompson from Elm Street, with his history of challenging board decisions? Mrs. Henderson, still bitter about the deck dispute? The mysterious new residents on Maple Lane who kept to themselves and paid their HOA fees without complaint, perhaps too perfectly? As if summoned by their collective anxiety, the familiar whirring sound returned. The board members rushed to Eleanor's front window, But this time they were ready. Margaret had her phone prepared to record, Harold clutched a pair of binoculars, and Gladys held a notebook to document every detail. The drone appeared over the tree line with mechanical precision, but its behavior was different today. Instead of conducting surveillance, it seemed to be performing. The device executed a series of aerial maneuvers that looked almost playful, barrel rolls, figure eights, and hovering patterns that seemed designed to taunt rather than observe. Then, as the board watched in horrified fascination, the drone began spelling out letters in the sky. Large, deliberate movements that traced words against the blue backdrop of Friday morning. The truth will set you free. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't just surveillance, it was psychological warfare. The pilot wanted the board to know they were being watched, judged, and found wanting. More importantly, they wanted the board to know that more revelations were coming. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, "Board meeting at 2 p.m. today. I'll be watching. Your guardian angel." The board members stared at the message in stunned silence. Their tormentor not only knew about their emergency meetings but was monitoring their communications. The level of surveillance they were under was far more extensive than they had imagined. "We need professional help," Eleanor declared, her pride finally cracking under the weight of desperation. "Private investigators, security consultants, maybe even counter-surveillance experts." But even as she spoke, Eleanor knew they were fighting a losing battle. Their aerial nemesis held all the cards: advanced technology, detailed intelligence, and most dangerously, the moral high ground. In the court of public opinion, the drone pilot had become Robin Hood, stealing from the rich authority figures and giving transparency to the oppressed residents. The investigation was just beginning, but Eleanor suspected they were hunting a ghost who could strike from anywhere at any time. Worse yet, this ghost seemed to know their every move before they made it. As the morning sun climbed higher and the drone disappeared beyond the neighborhood boundaries, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded like sheep toward some greater revelation. The pilot's message had been clear: the truth was coming, whether the board wanted it or not. The hunt for their identity had become a race against time, but Eleanor was beginning to suspect that Time's Saturday morning brought an autumn chill that seemed to seep into Eleanor Hartwick's bones as she discovered the newest development in what local news outlets were now calling the Willowbrook drone wars. Overnight, someone had erected a shrine in the community's Central Park, a modest display of flowers, handwritten notes, and a small placard reading, "Thank you, Guardian Angel." The shrine wasn't just a random act of rebellion. It represented something far more dangerous to Eleanor's crumbling authority: the transformation of their aerial tormentor from neighborhood nuisance to community hero. Residents who had never spoken above a whisper at HOA meetings were now openly celebrating the mysterious pilot who had exposed years of board hypocrisy. Eleanor stood before the makeshift memorial at 6:47 a.m., reading note after note of gratitude addressed to their unknown champion. "Thank you for showing us we're not alone," wrote Sarah Martinez. "You gave us our voices back," added Mike Henderson. "Keep fighting for us little people," pleaded Mrs. Chin in her distinctive handwriting. The most disturbing note came from someone signing themselves as a fellow truth seeker. "We know who you are, and we support you completely." The board's reign of terror ends now, had already run out. The implication was clear: the pilot had allies, possibly even accomplices, within the community. What had begun as a lone wolf operation was evolving into something resembling an organized resistance movement. Eleanor's phone buzzed with an urgent text from Margaret. "Emergency. Check your email now." The message that awaited Eleanor in her inbox would later be remembered as the moment their situation shifted from crisis to catastrophe. The subject line read, "The Willowbrook Files. Complete board violation documentation." The sender was listed simply as Guardian Angel. The email contained a professionally compiled dossier that read like a prosecutor's case file. 27 pages of meticulously documented violations, complete with timestamps, GPS coordinates, photographic evidence, and cross-references to specific HOA regulations. Every board member's transgressions were cataloged with forensic precision, creating an airtight case for systematic hypocrisy that would make any attorney weep with joy. But the dossier contained more than just property violations. Hidden within the technical documentation were financial records that Gladys thought she had kept secret, payment receipts from contractors that didn't match official HOA expenditures, cash deposits that corresponded suspiciously with project approval dates, and expense reports that suggested board members had been treating community funds as their personal piggy bank. The covering letter was written in the tone of a disappointed parent addressing wayward children. Dear board members, for 6 years, you have ruled Willowbrook Estates through intimidation, selective enforcement, and blatant hypocrisy. You have denied residents basic rights while exempting yourselves from every rule you've imposed on others. You have turned our community into a prison where fear replaces neighborly cooperation. Today, that changes. The enclosed documentation will be released to every resident, the county planning department, the state attorney general's office, and local media outlets at precisely 12 p.m. unless you meet the following non-negotiable demands. Immediate resignation of the entire current board. Public apology to all residents affected by selective enforcement. Full financial audit of all HOA funds going back 5 years. Elimination of all punitive fines and architectural restrictions. Democratic election of new leadership within 30 days. You have destroyed the trust that makes communities work. Now face the consequences of your actions. Your guardian angel. I'm always watching. Eleanor read the ultimatum 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of catastrophe. Their aerial nemesis hadn't just been conducting surveillance. They had been building a legal case that could result in criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and complete destruction of the board's credibility. The emergency board meeting convened at Margaret's house this time, Eleanor's residence having become too psychologically compromised for strategic planning. The 4 board members sat around Margaret's kitchen table like survivors of a shipwreck, clutching copies of the dossier that documented their collective downfall. We're finished, Gladys whispered, her voice hollow with defeat. Those financial records? How did they get access to my private banking information? This goes beyond drone surveillance into criminal hacking territory. Harold, ever the methodical treasurer, was studying the documentation with professional admiration despite the circumstances. This is extraordinary work. Whoever compiled this has extensive knowledge of legal procedures, financial auditing, and investigative techniques. We're not dealing with an amateur. This is someone with serious professional credentials. Margaret paced her kitchen with the nervous energy of a caged animal. The deadline is less than 6 hours away. If this information becomes public, we'll face criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and complete social ostracism. Our lives in this community are over. Eleanor, however, was studying the dossier with the calculating mind that had made her such an effective HOA president. Something about the document's structure nagged at her. The writing style was oddly formal yet personally vindictive. The technical expertise was impressive, but the emotional content suggested deep personal investment in the community's welfare. This isn't just revenge, Eleanor realized aloud. This is someone who genuinely cares about Willowbrook Estates. Look at the language, our community, neighborly cooperation, democratic election. This person isn't trying to destroy the HOA system, they're trying to reform it. The distinction was crucial. A simple revenge seeker would have leaked everything immediately for maximum chaos. A reformer would offer ultimatums and demand systematic change. Their guardian angel was attempting to save the community by destroying its corrupt leadership. As if summoned by their discussion, the familiar whirring sound returned. But this time, multiple drones appeared, 3 identical black devices that emerged from different directions and took positions around Margaret's house. The coordinated movement suggested either multiple operators or advanced programming that allowed simultaneous control of multiple aircraft. The lead drone hovered directly outside the kitchen window, its camera lens focused on the emergency meeting with unblinking mechanical attention. The other 2 drones positioned themselves at the front and back of the house, creating a surveillance perimeter that would capture any attempt at escape or external communication. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a new message. Smile for the camera. The whole world is watching now. Margaret rushed to her laptop and discovered that someone had hijacked the Willowbrook Estates Facebook group, live streaming footage from the drones directly to the community's social media platform. Hundreds of residents were watching in real time as their elected representatives huddled in what looked like a crisis meeting, surrounded by mechanical witnesses broadcasting their every move. The comment section was exploding with real-time reactions. Look at them scrambling like roaches when the lights come on. They're finally getting what they deserve. Guardian Angel, you're our hero. Don't let them escape justice. This is better than Netflix. The live stream had attracted viewers beyond just Willowbrook residents. News outlets, legal commentators, and social media influencers were sharing the feed, turning their local HOA drama into viral entertainment that was being watched across the state. Eleanor realized they were no longer just fighting for their positions, they were fighting for their dignity in front of an audience that had already declared them guilty. Every gesture, every whispered conversation, every expression of panic was being broadcast to a jury of their peers who had suffered under their authority for years. "We need to make a decision," Eleanor announced, her voice carrying the weight of inevitable defeat. "We can fight this and face complete destruction, or we can accept the terms and try to salvage some shred of dignity." Harold looked up from his financial calculations. "The evidence is overwhelming. Even if we could somehow discredit the drone footage, the financial documentation is legitimate. Gladys, some of these transactions could be prosecuted as embezzlement." Gladys burst into tears, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking under the pressure of public exposure and potential criminal charges. "I never meant for it to go this far. The kickbacks were just small amounts, and I always intended to pay the money back." Her confession was being live-streamed to hundreds of viewers, creating an inadvertent admission of guilt that would be screen-captured and preserved as evidence. The Guardian Angels' psychological warfare had worked. They had forced their opponents to destroy themselves on camera. Margaret stopped pacing and stared directly at the drone's camera lens. "Whoever you are, you've won. The board will resign, but know that you've destroyed lives along with our authority. We're human beings, not cartoon villains." The drone's response was immediate and pointed. It executed a slow, deliberate shake, left, right, that unmistakably conveyed the message no. The Guardian Angel wasn't accepting Margaret's attempt to claim victim status or generate sympathy from their watching audience. As noon approached, Eleanor Hartwick faced the hardest decision of her 6-year reign as HOA president. She could fight to the bitter end and watch her reputation, her finances, and possibly her freedom destroyed in a very public courtroom battle. Or she could accept defeat from an enemy whose face she had never seen and whose identity remained as mysterious as morning fog. The shrine in the community park had grown throughout the morning as more residents added their tributes to the Guardian Angel who had liberated them from years of oppressive rule. Children had drawn pictures of heroic pilots, teenagers had composed rap songs about drone justice, and senior citizens had brought homemade cookies as offerings to their mechanical savior. Eleanor looked at her fellow board members, Margaret's defiance cracking like old paint, Harold's methodical mind calculating their odds of survival, Gladys's tears streaming down cheeks flushed with shame and fear. Then she looked at the drone's camera lens, knowing that somewhere behind that mechanical eye was a human intelligence that had outmaneuvered them at every turn. The clock was ticking toward their deadline, and Eleanor Hartwick was about to learn that sometimes surrender is the only victory left to claim. At 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the Guardian Angel's deadline, Eleanor Hartwick made the call that would end her 6-year reign as HOA president. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number for Channel 7 News and requested to speak with their investigative reporter about a significant community development regarding the Willowbrook drone situation. The livestream audience had swelled to over 3,000 viewers as word spread across social media platforms. Local news vans were already positioning themselves at the community entrance, drawn by the viral nature of the story and the promise of a real-time political collapse. What had begun as neighborhood drama had evolved into a regional spectacle that was being covered by outlets as far away as Atlanta and Nashville. Eleanor stood on her front porch, facing a crowd of reporters and neighbors that had materialized like vultures sensing carrion. The 3 drones hovered overhead in perfect formation, their cameras capturing every nuance of her defeat for posterity. Behind her, Margaret, Harold, and Gladys stood like condemned prisoners awaiting execution, their political careers about to end in the most public manner possible. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor began, her voice carrying across the crowd with the authority she was about to surrender forever. "After careful consideration and in the interest of community harmony, the Willowbrook Estates HOA Board of Directors hereby submits our collective resignation, effective immediately." The crowd erupted in cheers, applause, and vindicated whoops of celebration. Residents who had suffered under the board's authoritarian rule for years were finally witnessing justice served by their mysterious aerial champion. Signs appeared from nowhere, "Thank you, Guardian Angel," and "Drone Justice," and "The truth has set us free." But Eleanor wasn't finished. 6 years of political instincts kicked in as she realized this moment could define how history remembered her leadership. If she was going down, she would go down swinging. "However," she continued, raising her voice above the celebration, "we demand that our community's guardian angel reveal themselves. If you truly believe in transparency and accountability, step forward and identify yourself to the people you claim to represent." The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a forbidden barbecue grill. The crowd fell silent, 3,000 livestream viewers held their collective breath, and even the news reporters stopped their frantic note-taking. The drones hovering overhead seemed to pause, as if their operator was considering Eleanor's dare. Then, from the back of the crowd, a voice called out with surprising clarity, "You want transparency? You got it." All heads turned toward the speaker, cameras swiveled, and the drones repositioned themselves to capture the moment. Through the crowd walked a figure that made Eleanor's heart skip like a scratched record, Dr. Jennifer Chen, the retired aerospace engineer who lived at 47 Maple Lane with her husband Robert. Jennifer Chen was not what anyone had expected their guardian angel to look like. A petite woman in her mid-60s with silver-streaked black hair and the calm demeanor of someone accustomed to solving complex problems, she looked more like a beloved grandmother than a high-tech vigilante. But as she approached the front of the crowd, carrying a tablet and wearing a slight smile, the pieces of the puzzle began falling into place with devastating clarity. "Dr. Chen?" Eleanor gasped, her voice betraying genuine shock. You're the pilot?" Jennifer nodded with the serene confidence of someone who had planned this moment for months. 37 years with NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, specializing in unmanned aerial systems and remote sensing technology. "When I retired to Willowbrook Estates 3 years ago, I thought I'd found a peaceful community where my husband and I could enjoy our golden years." She paused, letting the weight of her credentials sink in. The crowd was mesmerized. Their mysterious guardian angel wasn't some tech-savvy teenager or disgruntled contractor, but a legitimate rocket scientist with the skills to wage sophisticated aerial warfare. "Instead," Jennifer continued, her voice gaining strength, "I found a community terrorized by petty tyrants who use their authority to settle personal grudges and line their own pockets. I watched good people suffer under arbitrary rules while the rulemakers exempted themselves from every regulation they imposed on others." Eleanor's mind raced through 3 years of interactions with the Chens. They had been model residents, quiet, compliant, never causing trouble or challenging board decisions. Jennifer had attended exactly 3 HOA meetings, sitting in the back and taking notes but never speaking. Robert had served on the landscaping committee without complaint. They had been invisible. "You were gathering intelligence," Eleanor realized aloud, her voice carrying a mixture of admiration and horror. "For 3 years, you were studying us." Jennifer smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both grandmotherly and terrifying. "I was doing what engineers do, identifying problems and designing solutions. The problem was a corrupt HOA board. The solution was comprehensive documentation of your violations, systematic exposure of your hypocrisy, and strategic application of public pressure to force systemic change." She held up her tablet, showing a complex flight control interface that looked like something from Mission Control. 3 custom-built surveillance drones, each equipped with 4K cameras, GPS tracking, and encrypted communication systems. Flight patterns optimized for maximum coverage with minimal detection risk. All perfectly legal under current FAA regulations for hobbyist drone operation. Harold, ever the detail-oriented treasurer, couldn't help asking, "The financial records? How did you access private banking information?" Jennifer's smile widened. "I didn't hack anything, Mr. Finch. I simply observed. Your midnight meetings at the bank, Gladys counting cash in her kitchen window, Margaret meeting with contractors in public parking lots. I documented what you chose to do in observable spaces. The financial connections were simply logical deduction based on timing correlations." The crowd was hanging on every word as their guardian angel revealed the methodology behind her campaign. News reporters were frantically scribbling notes while live-stream comments exploded with praise for the brilliant engineer who had single-handedly brought down a corrupt power structure. Gladys, who had been silently weeping throughout the confrontation, suddenly looked up with desperate eyes. "Dr. Chen, we never meant to hurt anyone. The community needed improvements, and sometimes the budget constraints required creative solutions." Jennifer's expression hardened with the precision of laser guidance systems locking onto their target. "Mrs. Morrison, you embezzled $47,000 from the Community Landscaping Fund over 2 years while denying residents basic maintenance requests. You forced the Williamson family to pay a $500 fine for a broken mailbox while you installed a $3,000 garden shed without permits. Your creative solutions were theft and hypocrisy." The mathematical precision of Jennifer's accusations cut through any possibility of excuse or rationalization. Every dollar was accounted for, every violation documented, every instance of selective enforcement cataloged with scientific accuracy. Margaret, making one last attempt to salvage some dignity, stepped forward. "Dr. Chin, you've made your point. We've resigned as you demanded. But was it necessary to humiliate us so publicly? Couldn't this have been resolved through proper channels?" Jennifer's laugh was soft but carried the weight of 3 years' accumulated frustration. "Proper channels? Mrs. Pemberton, you denied 17 legitimate architectural applications while approving your own violations. You ignored 34 formal complaints about board conduct. You treated proper channels like a medieval moat designed to protect your authority from accountability." She gestured toward the crowd of residents who had gathered to witness their liberation. These people tried proper channels for years. They filed complaints, attended meetings, followed procedures. You responded with fines, threats, and retaliation. Sometimes the system is so corrupt that it can only be fixed from the outside. Eleanor, facing complete defeat but still clinging to her political instincts, made one final attempt to control the narrative. "Dr. Chin, your methods were illegal. Surveillance without consent, invasion of privacy, harassment. Everything I recorded was visible from public airspace or through windows you left uncovered," Jennifer interrupted with the patience of someone explaining basic physics to a confused student. "I broke no laws, violated no privacy expectations, and operated within all federal regulations. Unlike your board, which violated county building codes, state financial regulations, and basic ethical standards." The crowd erupted in another round of applause as their champions systematically dismantled every attempt at deflection or blame shifting. Jennifer Chen had not just exposed the board's corruption, she had done it with such methodical precision that no defense was possible. As the news crews captured the historic moment and the live stream audience celebrated their victory, Jennifer raised her tablet and executed one final command. The 3 drones descended in perfect synchronization, landing on the grass at her feet like mechanical birds returning to their master. "The surveillance phase of this operation is now complete," she announced with the formal tone of a mission commander. "All evidence has been compiled, all violations documented, and all necessary authorities notified. The democratization of Willowbrook Estates begins today." Eleanor Hartwick stood on her porch, watching her community celebrate the end of her authority under the command of a woman who had outmaneuvered her so completely that resistance was not just futile, it was mathematically impossible. The guardian angel had revealed herself to be exactly what the community needed, a brilliant problem solver with the tools, skills, and determination to fix what was broken. The mystery was solved, the villain was revealed, and the hero had claimed victory. But as Eleanor would soon discover, The end of the DroneGate scandal was really just the beginning of Willowbrook Estates' transformation into something calm. 6 months after the dramatic resignation of the Willowbrook Estates HOA board, the transformation of the community had become a case study taught in urban planning courses across 3 states. What had begun as a drone surveillance scandal had evolved into something far more significant, a complete reimagining of how suburban communities could govern themselves through transparency, cooperation, and actual democracy. Dr. Jennifer Chin stood in the same community park where residents had once erected a shrine to their anonymous guardian angel, but now the space served a different purpose. The monthly community forum was about to begin, and unlike the sterile, intimidation-filled board meetings of the Eleanor Hartwick era, these gatherings buzzed with genuine civic engagement and collaborative problem-solving. The shrine had been replaced with a permanent memorial, not to the guardian angel, but to the principle of transparent governance. A simple plaque read, "In memory of secrets kept in darkness, and in celebration of truth brought to light." Below it, a QR code linked to the community's new digital transparency portal, where every decision, every expenditure, and every policy change was documented in real time for any resident to review. Completely different. Jennifer, now serving as the elected community coordinator, a position that carried far less authority than Eleanor's former presidency, reviewed her tablet as neighbors gathered on folding chairs arranged in a circle rather than the hierarchical rows that had characterized the old regime. The technological system she had developed for surveillance had been repurposed into tools for democracy, live streaming meetings, digital voting platforms, and transparent budget tracking that made corruption virtually impossible. The community had prospered under its new governance model. Property values had increased by an average of 12% as word spread about Willowbrook's innovative approach to HOA management. Real estate agents marketed the development as the future of community living, and urban planning graduate students regularly visited to study their transition from authoritarian rule to collaborative democracy. Sarah Martinez, now serving as the elected communications director, called the meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. Before we begin tonight's agenda, let's welcome our special guests, Dr. Patricia Williams from the State University Urban Planning Department and her research team, who are documenting our governance transformation for their upcoming book on HOA reform. The crowd of 73 residents applauded politely. Unlike the sparse, fear-driven attendance of the old board meetings, community forums regularly drew participants from across all demographics and property types. Children played quietly in a designated corner while their parents engaged in civic discussions. Senior citizens shared tables with young families. The invisible barriers that had once divided the community into competing factions had dissolved under the warmth of genuine democratic participation. Mike Henderson, elected as Community Safety Coordinator, stood to present his monthly report. Crime statistics continue their downward trend. We're at a 6-month low for property violations, noise complaints, and neighbor disputes. Turns out, when people feel heard and respected, they're less likely to take their frustrations out on each other. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The community that had once been paralyzed by HOA violations, fines, and enforcement actions was now largely self-regulating through social cooperation rather than punitive measures. The elaborate rule structure that Eleanor's board had used to control residents had been replaced with a simple community charter based on mutual respect and common sense. Jennifer rose to present her technology committee report, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had once challenged corruption from the shadows. The transparency portal has processed 1,247 resident inquiries this month, with an average response time of 18 minutes. Our digital democracy platform has facilitated 43 community votes on various issues, with participation rates averaging 78% of eligible households. She paused, looking around at faces that had transformed from suspicious and fearful to engaged and hopeful. Most importantly, 0 residents have requested anonymity protection when submitting concerns or proposals. When people trust their government, they're willing to put their names on their opinions. The contrast with the old regime was stark. Eleanor's board meetings had been exercises in secrecy, intimidation, and selective enforcement. Residents had whispered complaints in parking lots and submitted anonymous violations reports out of fear of retaliation. Now, community members openly debated policy changes, proposed improvements, and held their elected representatives accountable through regular performance reviews. Dr. Williams, the visiting researcher, raised her hand. Dr. Chin, your community has become a model for HOA reform nationwide. What would you say was the key factor in successfully transitioning from authoritarian to democratic governance? Jennifer considered the question with the analytical precision that had made her such an effective guardian angel. Information asymmetry was the foundation of the old power structure. The board maintained control by limiting residents' access to financial data, decision-making processes, and enforcement patterns. Once we eliminated that asymmetry through radical transparency, authoritarian control became impossible to maintain. She gestured toward her tablet, which displayed real-time community statistics available to every resident. When everyone has access to the same information, power naturally distributes more evenly. Democracy isn't just about voting, it's about informed participation in governance. Harold Finch, now serving as a volunteer bookkeeper under the new system's oversight protocols, nodded from his seat in the audience. The financial transparency has been extraordinary. Every expenditure over $50 requires community notification. Every contract is posted online for resident review. There's literally nowhere to hide questionable spending. The redemption stories had been remarkable to witness. Harold, stripped of his board authority but freed from the pressure to maintain corrupt practices, had discovered genuine fulfillment in transparent financial stewardship. Margaret Pemberton had channeled her organizational skills into running the community's disaster preparedness program. Even Gladys Morrison, after completing her court-ordered community service for the embezzlement charges, had found purpose in managing the neighborhood food pantry. Only Eleanor Hartwick had been unable to adapt to the new reality. She had moved away 3 months after her resignation, relocating to a gated community in Florida where traditional HOA authoritarianism was still welcomed. Her house had been purchased by a young family with children who immediately removed the intimidating "no solicitors, no exceptions" signage and replaced it with a cheerful "Welcome Neighbors" placard. As the community forum continued, residents discussed upcoming projects with the kind of enthusiasm that had once been reserved for complaining about board overreach. The community garden expansion, the new playground equipment, the neighborhood watch program, all initiatives that had emerged organically from resident input rather than top-down mandates. Mrs. Chen from Pine Street, no relation to Jennifer, raised her hand to speak. I wanted to thank everyone for the support during my husband's recent illness. The meal train, the lawn care volunteers, the transportation assistants, this feels like a real community now, not just a collection of houses with shared amenities. The comments sparked a round of applause that highlighted perhaps the most significant change in Willowbrook Estates. Under the old regime, residents had been isolated by fear, suspicion, and the board's divide and conquer tactics. The new governance structure had fostered genuine social connections that extended far beyond policy discussions and administrative procedures. As the meeting drew to a close, Jennifer made an announcement that would have been unthinkable under the old system. Next month, we'll be hosting an inter-community conference with HOAs from surrounding developments who are interested in adopting similar transparency reforms. We'll share our governance model, our technology platforms, and our lessons learned from the transition process. The idea of sharing power, revealing successful strategies, and helping other communities achieve similar reforms represented everything that the old board had opposed. Eleanor's administration had been built on maintaining competitive advantages, hoarding information, and preserving the mystique of exclusive authority. After the formal meeting ended, residents lingered in the park, continuing conversations that had begun during the forum. Children played under the watchful eyes of parents who were no longer afraid their neighbors might report them for minor violations. Teenagers helped elderly residents fold chairs and clean up without being asked. The community had rediscovered the social bonds that HOA authoritarianism had systematically severed. Jennifer walked through the crowd, her 3 drones packed away in a storage case that she now carried to demonstrate the technology during her frequent speaking engagements at other communities. The mechanical witnesses that had once documented corruption now served as educational tools, teaching other residents how transparency could be achieved through citizen oversight. Dr. Williams approached Jennifer as the crowd began to disperse. Dr. Chin, one final question for our research. Do you ever regret the methods you used to expose the board's corruption? Some critics argue that drone surveillance, even when legal, represents a violation of privacy norms. Jennifer paused, watching families walk home together under streetlights that now illuminated a community united rather than divided. Dr. Williams, privacy is a luxury that can only exist in a framework of trust. When authorities abuse their power in secret, citizens have a responsibility to bring those actions into the light. The temporary discomfort of exposure is a small price to pay for permanent transparency. She gestured toward the memorial plaque that had replaced the guardian angel shrine. The real question isn't whether surveillance was justified. It's whether we can maintain the democratic gains we've achieved. Transparency requires eternal vigilance, and vigilance requires tools. As the last residents headed home, Jennifer remained in the park for a few minutes longer, reflecting on the journey that had transformed her from a quiet retiree into a community revolutionary. The skills she had developed during 3 decades of aerospace engineering, systematic analysis, patient observation, precise execution, had proven surprisingly applicable to the challenge of democratic reform. The DroneGate scandal had ended 6 months ago, but its legacy lived on in every transparent vote, every open budget discussion, and every resident who felt empowered to participate in their community's governance. What had begun as an exposure of corruption had evolved into a blueprint for democratic renewal that was spreading to HOA communities across the region. Jennifer packed up her tablet and headed toward her modest house on Maple Lane, where her husband Robert was waiting with dinner and questions about the evening's discussions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for civic engagement, and new chances to prove that democracy, once properly established, could sustain itself through the collective wisdom of informed citizens. The guardian angel had revealed herself, completed her mission, and discovered that the most satisfying surveillance was the kind conducted in plain sight, the vigilant oversight of citizens watching their own government work in service of the common good. In Willowbrook Estates, the age of secrets was over. The age of sunlight had begun.